Okay, so my topic is about Oregon's racial history, and the idea was sparked by this website. It's a looking back in order to move forward. It's a city website from Portland, just about Oregon's racial history and the United States racial history as well. And it says in here that Oregon became the only state admitted to the Union with an exclusion law written into its state constitution. So in 2002, and obviously that means there's a lot of racial language in it. So in 2002, ballot measure 14 was put on the ballot to get people to vote and to try and get rid of the racial language, such as the use of the terms Negroes, mulattoes, and whites in the Constitution. And like these terms and the laws that they were speaking about had really no effect anymore because of federal law that superseded them. But which is interesting because actually the 14th and 15th Amendment were not really were not ratified in Oregon as quickly as they were in other states. The 15th Amendment wasn't officially ratified until 1959, according to the state timeline. Um, and I mean, it says interracial marriages weren't repealed, or the laws prohibiting that weren't repealed until 1951. There's a lot of laws that it took Oregon into the 20th century to repeal. But anyway, so this was the ballot measure. This site just gives some Ballotpedia. It's kind of like a Wikipedia. Just gives some basic background on what the ballot measure was, and then this site shows the breakdown of by county who voted for and against it, and it's interesting because a lot of the less densely populated areas voted more highly no. Um, for example, in Harney County, only about 3,000 people voted, and that's pretty close to a 50-50 split. I mean, for a bill like this, you wouldn't think it would be something that you'd even have to think about. And then this website shows OregonVotes.gov, so like an official state tally, I guess, of how people voted, shows the breakdown by county of the actual numbers. Um, and then this website is the only one I could really find that talks specifically about this ballot measure. And it's definitely positive toward the measure being passed. Calls it a no-brainer in the 21st century to remove the language. But then it questions why people would vote no on it, why almost a third of the state's voters would vote no on it. Um, but then it kind of doesn't really question it that much because after they talked to the editor of a black-oriented Portland newspaper that said he didn't feel any opposition to it at all, claiming that maybe it's just the 30% of people who vote no for anything. Um, and then it goes into a bit of the history of it and how the county breakdown worked and stuff. But it doesn't really question it all that much. It kind of brushes over the fact that there could be still some real racial tension issues in Oregon. Because 30%, I mean, I've seen bills passed with higher percentages that just seem like no-brainers, and it's interesting that that one wasn't like that. Especially since the laws really weren't enforced anyway. It doesn't seem like a big deal to just get rid of the language. But anyway, so this site then talks about Oregon's history as a racist utopia. It was made by a guy who grew up in the Midwest and traveled to some of the quote-unquote whitest places in the country, Oregon being one of them. I read somewhere else that Oregon was only 2% of the population of Oregon was made up by African American people, whereas 14% of the country was, and those numbers are probably a little bit dated, but it was interesting to see how different it was here. And I mean, you can easily see that when you walk around really anywhere. Um, but yeah, so it goes into the history of that, and it's interesting. The tone is definitely very like negative towards the idea of Oregon's past and its racial discrimination and stuff. And then this Portland Occupier blog, I'm assuming, is about just the question, why aren't there more black people in Oregon? And it's really interesting. It talks a lot about um, like Jim Crow segregation in the early 1900s and redlining and all that stuff, and it's really interesting. I'm definitely going to have a lot of use from it, um, and just how the laws of the past definitely influence the way communities are set up now. It talks a lot about Northeast Portland and how that is the black um, part of Portland, but even that's becoming whiter, and that's interesting to see. And then this guest opinion piece from the Oregonian also just talks about Oregon's history of racial laws and goes and talks about two specific free African Americans that came to the Oregon Territory but ended up in what's now Washington um, because Oregon just didn't want them. And they became pretty prominent landowners, so that's kind of interesting. But yeah, so in general, it's just this topic's really interesting. It was really hard to find like articles and um, opinion pieces and stuff like that about the actual bill, but it was pretty easy to find stuff about Oregon's history in general. So I'm hoping to find some more stuff, and if anybody has any suggestions, that would be really great, because it was really hard to find opposition to this, and I searched for hours and I just couldn't find it. So I don't know if I'm just typing in the wrong things, but if anybody has suggestions, that would be great, because I could definitely use them. So yeah, I'm really excited about this. I think that the history of this definitely fits with a lot of the history of the West, just of not wanting people here that aren't white and stuff, and as the West being set up as an area for poor white men to find fair labor, and that whole idea of free labor and stuff that we were talking about in class. So yeah, that's my topic. Please, suggestions. I would love it. So yeah, that's it.